Hello and welcome to the American Photo Trek's post-processing video. And right now we're going to be post-processing just one picture we took Friday night at our Barns, Stars, and Windmills workshop. And just again want to say thank you to everybody who attended, had a really good time. Hope everybody got some really good images, and hope this post-processing video helps you refine those images to something that you really like. And we're going to do two videos. The first one is going to be this one. It's just going to show you the basic editing that I'm going to do, starting off here with bridge and then going into camera raw. Then I'm going to do a second video where we go into a little bit more detailed processing in Photoshop using a plugin or two. Maybe you have, Photoshop and use it and comfortable with it. Maybe you have the plugins or whatever, but you're just going to see how I do it. And that I'll preference right away. This is just how I process it. So you can find other things online and different things, but if you like my images, this is how I come up with them. All right, we're going to start off with this one here. And just a couple quick things about how this video works. I've got a little thing on here that shows you what I'm pressing on the keyboard. So if you're wondering what I'm pressing on the keyboard, look to this little square right here. I'm moving the mouse around it. And then of course you can always just pause it to catch up with me as I go. I'll probably be moving fairly fast, but since it's video, you can stop it, catch up, do what you need to do. All right, so this is the image that I think we're going to process. Just a pretty simple Milky Way image. It's the galactic core rising up out of a pretty straight horizon here in a country road, almost like driving you into the Milky Way. So I'm going to double click that right there. All right, there it is. And this is just the raw file right here. And just preference, you can see I really encourage people to play with ISO, to turn up their ISO, gives you more information. And here you can see I'm at ISO 5000, 20 seconds right there. I've got a lot of information to play with. And as you can see, there's not a lot of grain. These new cameras just are excellent at handling higher ISOs. So I mean, you can see some colors, you can see some detail, and not a lot of grain or noise that you might call it. So now I always start off with, believe it or not, here we're in the basic editing function. I start off with clicking the raw button, the auto button. I click it, and of course that's going to always brighten things too much. I have to bring that down, the exposure back down to where I want it. And in fact, with 5000 ISO, I may have to bring it down even maybe a minus 5% there. No, I think we're pretty darn close to where we exposed it. So we're going to go right there. Contrast is your friend when processing Milky Way images. Turn that up, but don't turn it up too much. Actually, clarity is where we really get the Milky Way to pop. And I'm going to turn this up down here. And there you can see the stars really start being more defined. And you can start seeing that galactic core and the cloud of the Milky Way. This is a place where we really turn things up. Highlights is primarily your stars. Shadows is primarily your foreground. Now I'm going to really turn that up because again, I can. See how this starts to come out here, and you start to even see the blades of grass and the tire tread markings on the road. It's coming out there. That's nice. I like that. Okay, and a little vibrant. Just want things to pop a little bit. Don't really mess with saturation too much. We'll give it 1. There we go. All right, and now comes one of those as to taste things. And I know sometimes that can be frustrating when you're watching one of these how-to videos. You're like, don't tell me to do it as to taste. Tell me to do it like you do it. Well, this is just unfortunately one of those kinds. When it comes to white balance, if you shot in RAW and you shot at auto white balance, this is where you get to make some creative decisions. And what you do is you don't want to move it too much, but this is where the color of your sky, you can change it. I like a blue sky. See, there's blue. And we had a lot of that pollution in the air, which causes this green thing right here, but it's kind of pretty. So I like blue, but I like to keep my red. See, that's too much blue. So I'm going to go right about here. There we go. And now do we want a little more purple as far as a tint? A little less. I kind of liked it right about where it is. So there you go, there's the basic adjustment. Now, I don't do curves in Camera Raw for Milky Way shots. I do it for other things, but I do that later on. Sharpening, if you're shooting in RAW, it doesn't go through the JPEG sharpening. So your images you might think are like, well, I shot in RAW, but it looks a little soft. Well, that's because you get to choose when you shoot in RAW what kind of sharpening you want. Milky Way images, you don't want to over sharpen. It can look bad. So I'm only going to take it up to about 65 here, radius of only about 1.5 pixels. Then I'll hold down Alt and I'll move the mask, and what I'm doing is I'm only applying the sharpening to those areas, those fine areas around the stars, the fence posts, things like that. So I'm only applying it to the areas where I need it. And that's what the mask does for me. And I'm holding down Alt so I can see just where it's applied. And here you can see now, boy, we've really got some sharp detail on the road. We got some sharp detail on the fence. I love the horizon and how sharp things are on the horizon there. We've sharpened this thing, I think, just right. Perfect. We can do a little noise reduction, although I got to tell you, I am shooting with the Sony a7S, and it don't need much even at ISO 5000. But different cameras, different makes, models, you may need it, play with it. But keep in mind that as you up the noise reduction, then you might lose some detail and it might start to look a little soft. So sparingly, just only as you need it. This is something else. You can use the mask to see just where it's being applied. And then you do that by holding Alt. All right, now let's go down to the lens correction here. And if you're shooting with one of the Rokinon lenses, which a lot of people were, there's not going to be a profile for it anywhere in these lens profiles. But I'll show you something you can do that's just as effective. I'm shooting with the Sony, so there is no Rokinon down here for me to pick a lens profile, so I'm just going to say Sony. And now I'm going to pick a focal length similar to the focal length that I was using. I was using, I think, a 24, so there's 24 right there, and I'm going to pick that, and boom, look what happened. The distortion in the middle went away. Vignetting is almost completely gone, just with one little click of the mouse as the, and I'll even get rid of a little bit more vignetting there, just right around there. And that's an easy way to handle a lot of the distortion and other problems right there. Just pick a profile that's very similar to the lens you were using. Now we'll go back to basic corrections. Kind of liking that. We can see the Milky Way rising up out of there. We got a lot of this air glow, this light pollution air glow stuff in there with the green. So the Milky Way isn't quite as boom, sharp, dramatic as it is in some of my other shots. So here's what we're going to do to really get the Milky Way to pop even more. We're going to click the adjustment brush right here. Do you see that? All right, I'm clicking it. Now, I'll set everything back to 0 here. And what happens is this is creating a gradient brush. The center of the brush, as I move it back and forth here, that is going to be applying the adjustments that I make real hard, and then it's going to apply them less and less and less as it goes out to this circle. And the size of your brush you adjust using your brackets, just like you do in Photoshop. There it is there. I'm making it smaller using the right bracket or left bracket, making it bigger using the right bracket. Again, you can see what I'm doing over here. So I'm going to have this so that it just covers my Milky Way. I only want to make these adjustments to my Milky Way. Again, clarity is your friend with the Milky Way, so I'm going to crank that up. I'm going to give it a little more saturation, a little bit more contrast, and I'm going to have just a little bit more exposure on the Milky Way. You can play with this. Some of you may want to do even more exposure on the Milky Way, but then you just paint those adjustments to the places you want them. And there it creates this little pin. If you highlight the pin, then you can kind of see. And what we did right there is we just made the Milky Way pop just a little bit more right there. And I don't know, maybe that exposure, we didn't even really need to do it. Bring that down, a little bit more contrast. Again, clarity is our friend. Maybe we want the highlights to show a little bit more so that the cloud pops a little right there. Shadows maybe down so that again we get a little bit more contrast there. But all in all, not too bad. Might want to go back now to the basic adjustment. Boy, this sure seems bright for a nighttime Milky Way shot. What will happen if we bring down the exposure of the whole thing just a little bit? Just a little bit. Yeah, it's starting to look more like a nighttime scene, but I still like this foreground here, so I'm going to bring out the shadows even more. So now it's looking more like a nighttime scene, and we certainly had some colors to work with, didn't we? Look at all these different colors. So I think that's good right there for our camera raw adjustments. And even if you were just only doing the camera raw adjustments right there, you might just be happy with that. You know what, I'm going to do one more little thing. I'm going to go over to my my grayscale adjustments here, and I'm going to look at my reds, because I just don't see a lot of reds, but there are a lot of good red colors in the galactic center. I'm just going to up my saturation just a little bit on my reds, and I'm going to make my reds glow a little bit with a little bit of illuminate. There we go. And it's hard to see that adjustment. It's a little subtle, but I kind of like it. There we go. So now we've got just a, there we are, and I think that's good right there for the camera raw adjustments on this photo. The Milky Way is popping a little bit more, and we got our colors right, we got good definition and detail. So right there, even if we stopped right there, we'd probably be pretty darn good. All right, so that'll be that. And then we'll look, if you want to go on for further processing, then let's go on to part 2. Okay.